When someone takes their life, their whole family's world is turned upside down. The family members don't know how to deal with it. When people come over to grieve with them, they don't know how to handle it. It also affects the aged. When they get to a certain stage of life, they don't want to live and cause problems to their families. Suicide is a preventable public health phenomenon that plagues our communities. So today we're going to be talking about that on This Life.
You know, this week I was jokingly saying something about myself. Was involved in a difficult situation. I said, well, if it doesn't get better, I'm going to have to shoot myself. And then I realized when I made that joke that it really wasn't the kind of joke to be making, because I remember when several years ago a young lady came to me who was suicidal, and I was trying in every way to help her. You know, at the beginning of the show you said it's a preventable disease. That's what I was thinking. And I thought, I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep her from taking her life. And then she looked at me and she said, you know what, Carla, there's something that you need to realize. You can't keep me from killing myself. And I realized I can't, you know. I could call and hospitalize her, and then she can get out and make the same decision. It was a really odd moment to realize my inadequacy with that.
It's a shocking moment.
Yeah, it was.
Something I came in contact with this last week were the parents of a young man that had killed himself. And I was aware, you know, I gave them my condolences, but I was aware of how difficult it is to know the right thing to say, just because there are so many religious notions around taking one's life, or and the family was clearly grief-stricken by this. And so it was difficult to really know how to respond to them.
Well, something that I came across last week was an individual who had actually come to me once and told me that they were having suicidal ideation. And I remembered when she said it to me, I was like, what? Because she said SI. And I looked at her, I'm like, what do you say?
SI?
SI is what she said. And I said, what is SI? She said suicidal ideations. And I said, oh, okay. And it was a whole new realm for me, because though I've seen people over the years, this was the first person that had come to me and said, in very technical terms, knew what was going on. But I was really, it was interesting. We spent some time talking. Then I saw her last week, and she actually shared that that was something she struggles with a large group of people. You know, it was her way of just saying, this is who I am. This is what I'm dealing with.
And she
shared it with the community. She said it out in a large group of people.
Wow. What was the reaction?
People just listened, you know, because she just talked about the fact that something she struggles with, but she is depending on her faith and her family and her community to help her live one day at a time.
It's a lot of pain around this issue, I think, for the person that feels suicidal, but also for the rest of us who deal with it. Well, let's talk for a minute about a family situation here. Mark and Jill are parents of two girls, Sarah, age 14, and Sue, age 16. He tells you that he and his wife have been trying to raise morally responsible children. His wife read Sue's diary and confronted her at the breakfast table about what she found there. They were both disappointed with the response they received. Let me just pause. I'm not sure what response they expected to receive.
I know, to read a young girl's diary, that's that's horrible.
Sue shouted, "You want to know why I'm always upset? Well, here it is."
Yeah.
Mark says that Sue is withdrawn, has given away some of her personal belongings, and spends time alone in her room. Yesterday, Mark found a poem she had written entitled "The Beauty of Life 6 Feet Under."
Sounds like she's watching that sitcom or that.
Could be. Good grief, he tells you incredulously, girls are so melodramatic.
Oh.
Well, I think teenagers can be more dramatic with some things, but I mean, just what we were just saying, it's pretty awful to have your private thoughts read aloud over the breakfast table and confronted about things that are just private.
Well, I want to affirm the dad for actually talking about it to someone and asking, because it seems just by his last statement that girls are so melodramatic that he may be missing some things that are pointing to what this young woman is struggling with.
So it's more than just drama.
So it's more than just drama. And a lot of the times, I think, and maybe that's now a generalization I shouldn't make, but from time to time, we tend to look at behaviors and just put them along with genders. Oh, girls are so, and ... But what we hear going on here, it has some cause for some concern. She's giving away her things, you know, always in her room. So
yeah, and her privacy is being invaded. I mean, you know, so often suicide is about control. And you realize that if she's got a mother that's reading her diary and a father that's calling her melodramatic, she's not being taken seriously. And that's scary, actually.
it is.
And kids at that age are really trying to find out and develop their authentic self. You know, who am I at my core? And then to have it poked at like that, I think is really, really difficult. You know, you said that the girls are somewhat melodramatic at times. You know, boys kill themselves too, but they just do it. And sometimes you don't have the hints, and sometimes they do it in much more lethal ways. So I guess I wonder what we think that Mark and Jill should be doing here.
Well, and I want, you know, part of me wants to ask Jill, what were you thinking? You know, I know it's, I mean, we've probably been on both sides of this. I keep a journal, and I remember a time when I had access to my sister's journal. There it's set, you know. It's like,
with a little lock on it.
With a little lock that we all know you can basically stick anything in it. I don't know why they come with their own little locks, because any lock will do, any key will do. And I remember looking at that little journal saying, I could just unlock it and know everything about my sister's life. It would be that easy. And there was something in me that said, no, you can't, because the whole system will go awry. You know, there's this system of trust where if I read hers and she reads mine, and then what's the purpose of anything? And I remember that real huge moral dilemma. So I'm frustrated at Jill. What was she thinking? Or, I want to pose another idea. You think your child might be suicidal. Does that give you the right to then look in their journal?
That's a boundary issue, isn't
and
it?
be protective. So what would you say?
Well, what strikes me along the same line with the parents is, if the journal is the only way that you can get information about your child, then there's something wrong there.
Yes.
That's a good
There's
point.
something wrong there, you know, because on the one hand, as a parent, if you're not able to get information, then it seems okay to go and look at their journal. But I don't know if Jill and her husband have tried every other method, just spending time with her by herself, you know, taking her out, finding out what she likes, really creating a relationship, especially during the teen years when there's this push and pull between wanting to find myself, wanting to be myself, but realizing I don't want to be so far from you, you know, because it is scary to be out here on my own, dealing with the things I'm dealing with at school. Home needs to be a safe place. Mommy and Daddy need to be a place I can come and speak about what's going on and not feel judged and not feel, you know, as if it's not safe. And the fact that she's even gone in her journal, this is not a safe place. I would say to Jill and her husband, guys, you need to really create a safe place for your daughter to come and share what's going on with her.
Yeah, and you know, I think the things that, you know, I've looked back at my journal and my diary, and it's embarrassing. I mean, you know, it's all those little flighty ideas that you have when you're a teenager, and like, oh, he looked at me, or, you know, and I'm sure it's much worse than anything that we ever said or did or thought back then, but it's, you know, it's just, it was so private, it was so intensely private, and just the thought that, I mean, if my mother had read my diary, I would want to die.
Oh,
that would be terrible.
Absolutely. I remember writing in my little diary about the first time I wore a certain undergarment, and I wrote it in big letters in my little journal. And then the sadness to me is I was so afraid that someone would read it, I burned the whole thing. And now,
that's a
to
loss.
this day, I know, it's a terrible loss. But that's how much my privacy meant to me. And I think sometimes adults are not aware of how much that means to young people, especially young girls, and the privacy of their developing bodies and things like that.
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, too, for young people to find words to express various nuances of feelings and thoughts, and so that's a place to figure it out, and some of it is quite melodramatic,
Yes.
reflecting on my own.
And I think about Sue being 16,
Yes.
because she's a little bit older. She's a younger sibling who's
She's
looking
the
on
younger
and
one,
watching.
yeah. But she's the older
Sue's
one.
the older one of
Yeah.
the two, and I'm wondering what's the relationship like between the sisters, because they're not so old. The age gap isn't so big that they can't talk and confide in each other and know what's going on. So even that relationship would be another place for Sue to build some sense of trust, that's there. And
Well, you can be sure the younger one's not going to keep a diary.
yes, yes.
Oh, well,
after
yeah,
what has
given,
happened.
given what's happened.
Uh-huh.
What do you think about the poem that's been written, The Beauty of Life 6 Feet Under?
Well, a lot of, I have had the experience working in schools before where that's where teachers pick up on suicidality.
Right.
That kids will write an English essay about, why the world would be better off without me, or, things that are like death poetry, I think is the big thing, of what it feels like to, cut myself and have the blood, just really graphic kinds of things. And so I think that it's much more than melodramatic. That alarms me that he's minimizing the seriousness of this. We don't know if she's done this before, but that's just concerning to me.
So I'm thinking, I would say to Mark and to Jill, you all need to take her to see someone. She needs to go see a counselor, or you yourselves talk to a counselor and get some advice, starting with the school, finding out what's going on at school with her. Are they picking up on anything there? And maybe even trying with the school counselor first as a place. But it's a wake-up call for the parents to say, don't look at this as melodramatic.
Right.
Something's going on.
At the very least, don't bring it up at the breakfast table
Well,
in front of her
yes,
sister.
for
and-
Pete's sake.
Yeah. I never wondered who
I'm
Pete
sorry,
was.
but that's just nuts. This is a hard topic because there's some interesting statistics about teenagers and mood swings and these kinds of things and the, quote, melodrama. And there's a term called dysphoria, and that's just feeling kind of moody and melancholy and sad. And about 60% of teenage kids feel dysphoric. And a lot of adults look at that and say, well, they're really depressed. And they might just have these flooding of feelings. But the percentage of people who have full-blown depression are smaller than that. But I think we have to expect that some teenagers have this kind of a lull, this kind of a feeling. So it's hard to tease out whether it's suicide. So how do you suppose he would know whether this is a serious thing besides The Beauty of Life, 6 Feet Under?
Besides the poem? I don't think he can know unless he investigates further. But certainly to take it seriously. You just mentioned a statistic. I want to read a couple more. In 2007, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., accounting for almost 35,000 deaths. That's an awful lot of people. The overall rate was 11.3 suicide deaths per 100,000 people.
Wow.
An estimated 11 attempted suicides occur per every suicide death. So we've got 11 attempts for every death.
That makes sense because I know girls attempt more and boys follow
accomplish
through.
it.
And girls use more things like poisoning and cutting their wrist or taking an overdose, where boys will use weapons.
Jump in front of a train.
Yeah, hanging.
According to gender, suicide was the 7th leading cause of death for males and the 15th leading cause of death for females in 2007.
It's a tragic loss. It's a shocking loss.
We talked about risk factors, like you asked, Barbara, how would her father know if this should be taken seriously? Some of the other risk factors are prior suicide attempt, which we assume she hasn't had, family history of mental disorder or substance abuse, family history of suicide. I talked to a woman on the plane just several weeks ago, and she said that her husband had committed suicide, and it was just, she said it was horrible on her and the family. And she said, but what's interesting is that his father had committed suicide before him.
Wow.
And so now she's concerned about her daughter, just
okay.
because of the generational patterns.
It seems, can I stop you a second? It seems that when that becomes an option in the family, then the kids think, well,
of it,
if I get really bad, I could just do what Uncle Harry did,
Yeah.
or I can just do, what my mom did, or my life. They can't visualize their life past a certain age because that's when their parent did it. So I think it's a little bit tricky. Certainly the risk is higher. Well, one of the things that I wanted to say too was to comment when we were talking, and that is reflecting on what you said in the opening, Dilys, about one of your first comments of what you saw, and that is that when this young lady came to you and said, I've had these feelings, there's a burden of knowing that when you tell someone, that person feels tremendous burden and responsibility.
Okay, yeah.
And I can remember in my therapist training where I was told, then we have to make sure that we do everything reasonable, and you've gone through this, everything reasonable to prevent a death by suicide. And yet we know also, on the flip side, that there are things we could do where we can't make a difference in some cases.
Oh no,
which
that's
is really
what I felt.
devastating.
Yeah, when that young lady said to me, I was in my 20s, you know, it was when she said, "There's nothing you can do to prevent me from killing myself." It was a horrifying feeling, and yet I knew that if she did, I would feel guilty. Even though I knew I couldn't prevent her, I thought just the fact that I knew that she might. It's a horrible thing to know something like that ahead of time. You know you can't do anything. I knew I couldn't do anything, and yet I would have felt
The
terrible.
responsibility.
Oh, yeah, complete.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the things we should do, we probably should talk a little bit about what we should do. Maybe some of that'll come out in our questions.
Let's look at the questions. Yeah.
Oh, I'll read the first one. My wife committed suicide last year, and I still feel more angry than sad. Is this okay?
Let's talk about that feeling angry. What do you think that's about?
The anger is that she left, the way that she left. You know, I think we were just talking about the guilt that you feel when you know someone is doing that. But then there's the anger that you feel because it seems like that's such a selfish thing. Why would you do that? You didn't even think about the rest of us. I knew a family once where a dad took their life, and the family actually got to speak to him before he passed. And it was horrible because he had ingested some poison, and it was a slow process. He got taken to the hospital, and it was just the aftermath of that. You know, you don't even have time to get sad because you're like, why would you do this? Surely there was some other way. So it makes sense to me that this husband has that strong emotion because, and it's not even anger yet about himself, possibly about not being able to prevent it, but just this sense of, why would you do this? Surely we could have had, another outcome.
I just want to throw out that word selfish again because that's used a lot with suicide. I'm just thinking that people who come to the place of feeling like they have no other options, that's a low. I've never been that low. I've been pretty low, but not that low. And I think just as low as I have been was low enough. But to be even lower than that is almost inconceivable. And so, but yet people who take their lives have reached that low. And I'm wondering why we use the term, and we do. It's not just what you said here. We use the term selfish for that. Why do you think that is?
Well, people who are left in the aftermath struggle emotionally. They get depressed. They can't figure out. They feel like failures, like we've already said. They struggle. And a lot of times people will commit suicide without telling or without warning the family. And so it's blind.
Barbara? Why not terms like it's difficult, it's hurt our lives, it's made us angry? That I understand, but why the term selfish?
Well, there's something intuitive that feels right about it, but I don't know if I can articulate what it is.
I agree. I totally agree.
I think what strikes me is the sense that when if I think almost anything that brings some terminal end, the drunk driver that gets in the car, you would use the term selfish because you were thinking about yourself.
So
it's the sense of you weren't thinking about the other people
first.
This is about me. It has
nothing to do. And then because the low is so low and it's all about you, people who are outside don't even know how to connect. I mean, if you're around someone who's depressed and you're like, well, let's try this. Well, let's try that. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. And it's just like, no matter what you do, it's just continue. You're just like, could you think about me for a minute? Could you think about how this is affecting me just for a minute?
That makes sense. So so selfish then applies to a person who, for whatever reason, is thinking about themselves more than another human being.
Right. I think that's where the selfish term comes in, especially when it comes to suicide, because once that person is gone, they don't know the aftermath and how it affects the people that are behind.
You know, I had another thought about what could make this woman, a man, very angry, and that is this: people will come up to someone whose partner has died and say, "Well, didn't you know?
Yes.
Didn't you know?
Didn't they say?"
Oh, that they were getting
And
sad?
yeah, it almost feels blaming.
Yes.
You know, and that when we started off today, when I reflected about not knowing what to say, I was so conscious of not wanting this family to think, well, you should have known, because I think we all have a sense of outrage and shock that something like this happens.
Well, and it's hard to say that word. It's hard enough to say the word died.
But
my
suicide.
pet died, or my father died. But to say my spouse committed suicide or something like that's hard. That's
Yes.
very difficult to say.
Well, here's one question. My mother is 93 years old, has lived a long and productive life, but is now confined to a bed in a hospital on life support. She wants to be taken off these machines, but our family doesn't want to lose her. Is this suicide?
Oh, wow. Barbara?
Well, you know, I don't know that I can give a definitive answer, but I have some thoughts, and one of those is there's a difference in my mind between, well, I'm afraid even to go down that road, but to me there's a difference between willfully taking your life when you're, you know, at the prime of your life, and then when you've said, I've lived a wonderful life, this is mechanical means to keep me alive, you know, let's take me off this, and if I survive, then to God be the glory, and if I don't, I'm ready to go. To me, there's something different about that.
And I think the mechanisms are out there now for you to do that, for you to actually have a living will, or to have your health advance directive, so it's called, to say how you want to be treated. You don't want any superhuman, you know, means to be used to preserve your life. All that being said, though, for the family members, you know, here comes that word again. Here comes that word again.
Selfish?
Selfish. The family members feel like, you know,
What about us?
what about us?
We want grandma
We want grandma
around.
to be around.
Of course, that's understandable.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, grandma is on life support. She can't even talk to you. You know, she doesn't even know that you visited. So it definitely places the families in this sense of tug of war that you see going on. Well, I don't think we should take her off. Let her just stay on the machine.
You know, from years of working in ICU, I saw the struggle up close so many times, and I really understand the fact that we hate to lose somebody that's dear to us, and yet at the same time, we think about quality of life and what can be enjoyed, and where do we go with this? And it's a tough
It's
situation.
tough. Which is also the situation here is that they may not have talked to her ahead of time.
Right.
So now they're struggling with who should make this decision, and what a horrible decision to make if they haven't talked before. So
So everyone should really talk to their family members about what their wishes are.
that's another topic for discussion here.
That's right.
Here's another one. Our 16-year-old son recently attempted suicide. He gets good grades, plays in the band, and has lots of friends. We are a middle-class, loving Christian family that regularly spends quality time together, yet no one knew he was struggling with this. Are we to blame?
No. I would say that to even associate blame, to say it's something that you could do, based on what we've talked about so far, we often think, well, maybe if I had been more loving, maybe if I had been more present, maybe if I had spoken more, maybe if I had said no less and yes more often, maybe something I could have done. And we go back to what you said at the beginning. For individuals who are going through this, family members don't know, they're not prepared to deal with it. But this is what that person is struggling with. It's theirs. So to say, am I to take blame, I would say, no, don't blame yourself. That's a heavy burden to carry for that person.
I feel a little different about that, and that is, I don't think we have enough information to know.
Okay.
And I can understand that it's, pardon me, it's a difficult burden to carry, and I certainly agree with that. But we don't know if they kind of, as kids would say, they just kind of blew it off. Well, they're just melodramatic, or didn't take notice if that person had depression, clinical depression, that maybe they needed treatment. I know a lot of parents don't make sure that their kids are doing okay in that way and just think, well, they'll grow out of it, or it's a phase, or
maybe this young man is struggling with something that they're not aware
that
of.
they don't know of.
And the other thing I was thinking is this is one person's opinion. They think they're spending quality time. They think, I think we really wouldn't know unless we asked the son, you know, whether he thinks that it's someone is to blame or what part others are playing.
Sure.
Here's one more question. What are some signs I should look for when I suspect suicidal tendencies?
Well, we talked about giving away prized possessions. We talked about being isolating, certainly tearfulness. But, you know, there's another thing, and that is that depression is manifested by agitation and anger. And so someone who is really struggling around those things or makes...
becoming more withdrawn.
I think helplessness and hopelessness are the big key words.
Doing a lot of risky endeavors if they weren't risky before. My husband of 20 years committed suicide. Is there any way I could have prevented it?
You know, that's such a common question. Everyone in these questions have felt so to blame. That's understandable.
Well, and part of me wants to say there's always something more you can do looking back. It doesn't matter what in life it is. There is always something in hindsight that can be different. But that's not where we are. We're not in hindsight. We're in present sight. And so we can't, it's not a question we should ask very much, I don't think.
I agree.
A girl at my school is always threatening suicide. Is there anything I can do to know whether she's doing this for real or just for attention?
Well, that's where you get into, is it a suicide gesture or is it an attempt?
Right.
Wow.
And sometimes we can't always know.
Well, you take each statement seriously then.
Yes.
Each time they say it, you listen, but it almost becomes like the boy who cried wolf.
Right.
At some point, the person's like, oh, you're always saying this. But you think about it, if I don't take it seriously this time, she may or may not do it.
So we always
true.
need to take it seriously.
So we've been talking about suicide, a very difficult topic. We've been talking about the various things that can help and how to deal with people who threaten it. And we want to thank you for joining us on This Life.